OIC, otherwise known as the Omnipresent Information Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Peterson.
And I'm the co-host, Noah Hansen. The Omnipresent Information Connection podcast is all about your world and your unique walk on this path called life. We present fascinating, life-changing information from around the world that has been validated. We also authenticate the information by providing you with links to where you can find out more about what we are talking about on our show. This podcast includes historically accurate, genuine facts that have helped shape our daily lives into what they are today. Welcome, listeners, to another special holiday edition of the OIC Podcast. And by holiday, of course, I mean just like any other day. We don't really celebrate holidays around here, do we? No, it's being able to celebrate certain days, dates, and times over another day, date, and time seems almost counter-progressive to me. Why celebrate those days more than any other day, right, Kevin?
Absolutely, because every day is a day worth celebrating.
That's right, and that's what I'm trying to get at here, and thank you for making it as clear as possible. Every day is a day worth celebrating, but on this episode, we're talking about Halloween and the origins of where it came from. Halloween has some very weird historical aspects to it. I don't even really know where to begin when we talk about the origins of Halloween because there's so many places in history to pull from that went into it.
But there is the original seed of Halloween that had nothing to do with our current Halloween today.
It's actually really not that scary where it came from, though, Kevin.
No, because it all started with a very heartfelt harvest festival or harvest celebration dealing with the end of crop season and being able to clean up. And a part of that cleanup is being able to create a bonfire to then be able to give thanks onto Mother Nature for a great harvest and a good job done.
Mm-hmm. And this was in the Celtic tradition, so this is Ireland, Scotland, and that area.
Yes.
The celebration during that time was Samhain.
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 Because that's where the terminology "Samhain" your roots.
And Samhain means summer's ending.
Yep.
So it's literally just based off of the time of the harvest, the time that it was at, November 1st. That was what they called the New Year in Celtic culture. So their New Year, instead of being January 1st, instead of being like the Jewish tradition, which was April 1st, the Celtic tradition's New Year was turned around on November 1st. So on the night of October 31st, in Celtic culture, they were coming together and celebrating a bountiful harvest, basically.
Yes.
So that was quite a beautiful thing. It's less of that kind of tonality, and it's more of kind of like that.
Yes. This whole origin of Halloween, when it all came to be, was a gathering time, and it dealt with harvest and harvest time, the ending of harvest time, and the starting of winter. So because of a great job done that the farmers had participated to be able to bring in the crops,
Mm-hmm.
then they wanted to be able to celebrate. And it was just a natural thing because back then in those days, there was no TV or internet or newspaper or, books were very hard to come by. But the bottom line is that they wanted to be able to celebrate all the hard work from their labors. And so what they did is they built a bonfire, and then they had people bring food, and they had this big celebration with food and wine. And that was one of the greatest times back in those days, because during this celebration period of time, the bonfire was pretty huge because it was the leftover remnants of corn stalks and other types of crop that they had collected, but it was the leftover remnants of that was burning off to be able to want to have a positive crop grow in spring and summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And so they believed that if they burned off the unused portions of their crop, that would bring them good luck and favor into the springtime harvest.
Sure. So it was very positive, very natural.
Mm-hmm. And so, no, how did it go from something very loving, very caring, very sensible to something absolutely frightening?
Well, the celebration of death aspect of Halloween certainly wasn't a part of the Celtic culture. However, they did believe that at the transition from summer to winter, the transition from light to dark, there was a thinner veil between the spirit world and the material world. They believed that the spirits were more easily perceived and that they were more active at this time.
Why is it that around the world people celebrated the dead?
Well, as you know, there is the Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May. That is a celebration of the Day of the Dead. But the reason that they celebrate death so much during Halloween itself is because there are many kind of gruesome aspects of what has gone into Halloween besides just a bountiful harvest. It's really just a fascination, I think, that people have had with it. Fascination with spirits, ghosts, witches, all that kind of stuff.
Well, you have fascination, which is correct, but then you got lineage, heritage, tradition, right? Those three, right?
So are you talking about ancestry?
We're talking about ancestry, and for those people that weren't farmers, that weren't working the fields, and didn't have a farm job, the alternative or the second best thing to be able to do is to be able to honor those that have passed on, praying for, wishing for, hoping for a good future for those of the living through celebration. And how that came to be is all around the world, people had this intuitive, instinctive kind of thought patterning to honor the dead. They did it in all different kinds of ceremonies and celebrations, but it was all for the hopes, the wishes, the dreams come true for the living people that they were to celebrate the people that had passed on.
Right, it was for further prosperity, basically.
And so people were talking about their mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers, and about how great they were and what contributions that they had given while being alive. And that ended up being a really strong family bonding time because people then could be able to hear these stories from all different families dealing with struggles and achievements. And that was a really emotionally, physically, and spiritually bonding time for those people.
Yes, and what's something that is very easily told around campfires, but stories.
Mm-hmm. And so that has been going on for as long as not only I can remember, but for, almost the beginning of humankind.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you got two origins that started off being a very beautiful thing, and because of its beauty, it wasn't as attractive, it wasn't as sexy, it wasn't as desirable, and they wanted to be able to spruce it up. And so in order to be able to spruce it up, then they end up talking about, which also happens in families, haunted things that have happened throughout, other people's situations and circumstances. And it didn't just deal with humans, it also dealt with animals as well.
What do you mean?
When a dog or a cat or a horse or anything else that you can fathom or imagine that was important to that person that had perished, they would then celebrate on that particular day the passing of that animal that meant a great deal to them. It was to be able to give respect, give dignity back to the animal that had passed.
Mm-hmm.
And praying for and wishing for and hoping for that their remaining animals that were alive to be able to stay alive and to be remaining healthy in every area of that animal's life.
There's a lot more dangerous aspects of the winter, especially way up north in Ireland, you know?
Absolutely. And understand this. We just knew that they had to be able to take good care of those animals so that upon their slaughter, that they could be able to take care of humans in the manner that they took care of the animal, right?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's a perspective that's important for people to have nowadays. Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, and we'll dive back into the history after this short portion that I want to speak about, though. Now, there's a folk tale that originates in Ireland about a man who was called Jack, who held a lantern. And this is where jack-o'-lanterns come from. So the story goes, Jack was such an evil man that hell itself spit him out, and the evil one gave him a coal from hell to be able to light his path in a hollowed-out turnip. So originally, jack-o'-lanterns weren't pumpkins, they were turnips, and then later on, to make it easier, they changed it to pumpkins.
Not only because of the diameter or the space,
Right.
but it goes into then all these other folklore and legends about the Headless Horseman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you basically have is a lot of different stories from all around the world being adopted almost simultaneously through other cultures and then interbred through those different cultures to be able to come up with all these different stories of what we now know today.
Yeah, so it's a pretty chaotic origin of Halloween itself, but all these chaotic elements brought into one, and we ended up with Halloween. So another origin of Halloween, something that was more to do with Roman pagans, a Catholic holiday called All Saints' Day. And this is the origins of where Halloween came from, the word Halloween. Because All Saints' Day was also called All Hallows' Day. And it was a day that commemorated the Christian martyrs and people who died as saints. They switched All Saints' Day to be on the 1st of November in order to be able to more easily convert pagans to Christianity, to Catholicism.
Well, because there were other things on the calendar that kind of coincided on same similar days, right?
Yes, they wanted to be able to reach people more easily, so this was done also for the New Year holiday, as we've pointed out already on the New Year's podcast.
Mm-hmm. So it became November 1st, right?
Yep.
And so prior to November 1st was what, Noah?
What day was All Saints' Day prior to November 1st?
Mm-hmm.
So All Saints' Day was previously celebrated on May 13th, and it was moved to November 1st.
Excellent. The bottom line is that other cultures already had in place, already set into place, their day, date, and time for their celebrations. And so to be able to keep things in harmony and in unison with other people's celebrations, in and around that time, they've picked a date to be able to then make it official that November 1st would be All Saints' Day.
Yes. And now there are more aspects that go into Halloween. And one of these also has to do with bonfires around a very similar date, very close date. November the 5th was what was called Guy Fawkes Day in the United Kingdom. And it was a day that commemorated a man who
Attempted.
Well, he attempted to do something that really wasn't the best decision, I believe. Well, he was caught in the act, so it ended up not being. And it was he was trying to take out a king, and this king in particular was King James I. And King James was a Protestant king, and Guy Fawkes was a Catholic. And the clash between Catholicism and Protestants in that time caused him to make some rash actions and end up being caught in the cellars of the Parliament building with loads of gunpowder. And he was about ready to blow the whole building up.
Mm-hmm.
So he was caught in the act, and the day ended up being celebrated for Guy Fawkes and his attempt and failure at blowing up the Parliament and assassinating this king.
Now, the reason why Noah brought this up, and the reason for Guy Fawkes Day, is because Guy Fawkes had the right ideas, but was surrounded by ill-intentioned people. Instead of being able to really discuss, really to be able to talk out, or to be able to handle things differently, he had thought or believed that the only course of action was to be able to take this king out.
Yes, and his accomplice and the person who originally had the idea to assassinate King James was a man named Robert Catesby.
Mm-hmm. And Robert Catesby, if you look back in history, was very well connected with a lot of people in the area. And because of that, he would be able to get privy to information that most people wouldn't be able to get, to be able to aid other people in trying to achieve their missions or goals in life.
Yeah, so two very interesting people, both Catholics.
Mm-hmm. And so when Guy Fawkes got caught, people knew who Guy Fawkes was in the community and in the surrounding areas. Prior to him getting caught and wanting to be able to blow up this king, prior to that event, most of all that Guy Fawkes did was very honorable, very noteworthy, very genuine in his character. People around the area really enjoyed and liked the guy, but he had gotten information, and then he was then emotionally enabled through people that didn't have his best interests at heart, that then caused him to be able to want to be able to blow up the king.
Yes, he was trying to restore a Catholic monarch to the throne. And so he had intentions that were very rebellious, which a lot of people enjoy, obviously. Now, he is a symbolism of anarchy in this day and age.
Absolutely.
It lined up so well that people coming over from these countries that celebrated Guy Fawkes Day could also have the same week of celebration with the Celtic people who had come over, the immigrants from the Celtic countries. And then that also lined up with All Saints Day, which was an all-Christian, not just Catholic how it started, but an all-Christian celebration at that time, which many people celebrated that week as well. So you can see how all these celebrations around the same time kind of pieced together what we now have as Halloween. Many people associate Guy Fawkes with these masks, but those masks were not originally a part of Guy Fawkes Day. People didn't go around wearing masks on that date because of Guy Fawkes. What they did was they burned effigies and had bonfires of Guy Fawkes himself. So it was a very, very weird kind of holiday celebrating the United Kingdom. Now, Guy Fawkes had an interrogator that reported that his intentions in doing this rash act of blowing up the king and an entire building with him, his intentions were to be able to perform that which might be for the advancement of the Catholic faith and saving his own soul. And there's an important part of this that I want to make clear in this podcast, because as many of you listeners already know, unless this is your first podcast, we talk about God in this podcast, and there's certain aspects of who God is and what he has done for us that we want to point out here, where we believe Guy Fawkes was kind of lacking in his perception of. So, because he was looking for the advancement of the Catholic faith, that's already one that I want to hone in on here. Because the advancement of the Catholic faith, though he may have believed it at the time to be so, was not the advancement of God's kingdom necessarily. Where God's viewpoint was on the Catholic faith at that time and what was happening at that time was God's own. So he was very fired up, but he was fired up for a reason that was more superficial than the reason of just purely a relationship with Jesus Christ. Right?
Yes, correct.
Making sense? And so the saving of his own soul is another thing I want to hone in on here. Both parts are lacking because Jesus has already saved our souls. If we just put our faith in him and what he has done, that is why we are saved and how we are saved. We are not saved by our own works of rebellion in God's name, right? Blowing up a parliament building is going to get you in heaven.
Correct.
But it seemed like with this response to his interrogator, that's what Guy Fawkes was saying. He was trying to save his own soul.
Correct.
And so this act was an act of passion, but it was also an act of ignorance because you cannot save your own soul by doing any sort of act.
Yes.
It's all the act of Jesus Christ that was done that saves souls.
And what Guy Fawkes had learned from this is that when you solely do something, but then tell everyone else that you are planning on doing it, you can solely condemn yourself by talking about it.
Yeah, and that is where he was going wrong, definitely, was he was letting the word out. And what ended up happening was there was a letter intercepted warning Catholics in the Parliament building to be able to retire from the building, to be able to leave the building. And this letter caused suspicion of some act of rebellion happening. It wasn't specified what was happening, but it shared the information that the Parliament building was going to experience
some major setback.
Some major setback, yes. So yes, there was definitely some lacking of communication there, or too much communication, rather.
Mm-hmm. And because of that, he was unsuccessful in being able to go through with his act because he was caught. And when he was being questioned, interrogated, the person that was interrogating him or questioning him could be able to see his genuine character, that he didn't really want to be able to hurt, harm, or destroy anyone, but he wanted to be able to edify, build up the Catholic Church as well as himself.
Right. He could see the character in who he was.
Mm-hmm.
So this interrogator's name was Sir William Wadd. He was actually the supervisor of the torture of Guy Fawkes in interrogation.
Yep.
And so King James also was commemorating Guy Fawkes for his heart, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He was impressed by who Guy Fawkes was as a person. And so what he ended up doing was telling the torturers to use the less effective weapons or the less effective tools of torture and not have him have to go through such a hard time. But he still got condemned to death, and before he ended up being able to carry out that sentence, he committed suicide, and that's how Guy Fawkes ended. And so celebrating this is really, I believe, one of the least honorable aspects of Halloween.
Right, because here you have a suicide. Here you have a failed attempt being made. And then you have a failed person of character not being able to be whole and complete to be able to then render a result worth talking about.
Right.
But because of him and who he was as a person, they still wanted to be able to celebrate him. But The end result is that if you truly want to be able to create the change, it first and foremost needs to start in you.
With the right intentions, but also the right leadership.
Yes.
Because I believe that he wasn't being led by God in this endeavor. I believe he was being led by himself, essentially.
And the Catholic Church. And
yes. And also this man who I had mentioned earlier, who was his accomplice, Robert Catesby.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's go into more of the modern parts of Halloween here. Trick-or-treating, where'd that come from?
Trick-or-treating came from the ad campaigns, and basically the bottom line is that back in the early days, children used to run amok because families couldn't take care of their own children, and so children were running the streets, and so they utilized this particular day specifically, this particular week specifically, to be able to burglarize, to be able to destroy buildings and homes and that sort of thing. All this kind of reckless behavior running amok because of no parental guidance and no one claiming them. And so you've heard the story of the Lost Boys. But imagine back in the day, not being able to take care of your child, they literally allowed their children to go run out in the streets and to be able to collect whatever they needed to steal to be able to either bring it back home or to take care of themselves.
Yep, they were throwing rocks through windows.
And causing fires and disassembling things and putting them on roofs. But what we would call today as a class prank, a high school class prank, that's what it all kind of started into, but then quickly escalated out of hand to the point to where there are so many buildings on fire that they were starting to destroy their own town that they were living in, further promoting the financial decay and the destruction within the city.
Yes, and so what was happening was these distressed shopkeepers and people in their homes that were not joining in the mischief ended up putting out candy that was a sort of sign of peace between them and these mischief makers. And then in turn, the kids would not destroy their shops or property.
Yes. So imagine this. Kids were really in the hundreds, and they were literally commanding the streets. And so what adults felt that was in their best interest is to be able to leave a note saying that I understand that you can be able to and want to or are in the process of wanting to destroy my property, but instead I'm wanting to be able to offer you a treat, something to eat, so that you don't.
Right. And now then the candy advertisers, the candy companies, what this turned into eventually was a ad campaign where candy companies understood the value in this night, they understood the value in this tradition, this new tradition, and they decided to start advertising Halloween candy on that day for what was All Saints Day and all these other traditions combined. And it all ended up being one night on October 31st called Halloween for All Hallows Day, All Saints Day, and then turned it into a, in America, turned it into a tradition where it was all about stopping kids from tricking you and leaving out treats.
Right. But the bottom line is that we as adults were unable to stop the children. So in order to be able to try to be able to do things in a different way, in a new way, what they ended up doing is they tried to be able to leave out caramel apples and popcorn, anything and everything that they had at the time to be able to let the child know that we care about you and we don't really want you to be able to destroy us. And so because of that level of weakness in character, instead of being able to do something different, they just decided to be able to bow down to the children because the children were literally running the streets. They were literally causing so much damage and chaos and havoc that the adults were only then limited to a few options, either leave a treat and feed a child, or be able to be defeated and to be able to have your place of business being vandalized or burnt down.
Very nice wordplay there, like that.
Mm-hmm.
Defeated. Now, kids would also dress up in costumes, and one thing led to another, and eventually we got the holiday we have today where kids are dressed up in costumes. It's all because of, advertising way back in the day, where in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and onward, they kept on expanding on this opportunity to sell costumes, to sell candy, and to make money at that time. And it became a very consumeristic type of thing, just like Christmas became very consumeristic as well, because of all these advertisements and, the TV and media and things like that. Unfortunate aspect of it, but I believe it's one that was unavoidable. And if we're going to have a holiday like this, there are going to be companies that are trying to make money off of it.
Absolutely.
So the costumes, I believe, also was, it started out as kids not wanting their identities known in causing all this mischief.
Well, yeah, yes and no. Way back in the day, the kids did not even care about whether they were known or not, because there are so many children that they really couldn't really pick one out from another as far as whose kid was who.
That makes sense. So where'd costumes come from?
So costumes ended up coming from a campaign that a sales company decided to be able to promote, to be able to get kids inspired, to try to be able to be empowered, to be uplifted, to be somebody or something other than themselves on that day. And so a company had created paper costumes that quickly caught on fire, but the bottom line is that we, and I'm talking about us adults, try to be able to find any kind of a scenario situation that would interest children enough to be able to be persuaded back to being kind and loving and caring. And so because of that, a company created different Halloween costumes so that they changed it from a violent event to an exciting event, to where children could now be able to dress up in anything and for one night be absolutely anything that their hearts desired, but in a more peaceful way. And then from there, the candy companies started to be able to recognize profit from the opportunity. And so they came up with this campaign of trick or treat. That's where the terminology comes from. Either I destroy your property or you give me a treat, trick or treat, right?
Yeah.
And so cartoons then picked it up, radio picked it up, TV picked it up, and we as adults morphed a very bad situation into a more positive situation. And then the costumes just got bigger and better. And so today you have week-long Halloween festivals and celebrations. Basically, it was a whole newspaper, radio, and TV time to be able to put violence finally back to bed.
That makes sense. It was all very fear-based, too, which is ironically fitting.
Well, yeah, to be able to have children run the streets and to be able to tell you what to do and what not to do. Right. Yeah.
Yep. So a lot of immoral aspects of where this holiday came from. And it's really kind of a bind that was put on the people by the children. It's very interesting. And so the costumes being dressed up as goblins and ghosts and things like that come also from Samhain, the Celtic holiday for the harvest. As we said earlier in this podcast, they believe that spirits were more powerful and more easily perceived around this time. So there's always that aura of mystery or air of mystery and paranormal to the date, and that just transitioned into dressing up as these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But the most important thing to be able to take away from today is that anytime that you now, with all the intelligence and wherewithal that you have within you, anytime that you try to be able to celebrate or have your child celebrate a day for them not to be them, is taking away a lot of character from everything that you've built in them to want to be. So be mindful of that. I mean, a lot of parents have good intentions, and the best of intentions is to be able to create a child to not want or yearn or need to be Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, or any of these other characters that they could no longer be able to replicate or duplicate in their own lives. So if you're going to dress up as someone on Halloween, dress up as someone that you're about to become, so that people will be able to then see the real you come through.
I love that. That's amazing, Kevin. There's so much that we could talk about that subject, and why, looking up to false idols can be an issue in a child's life, but we will save that for another episode of the OIC podcast. And we want to thank you for listening, and also invite you to join us at www.inanewway.com to discuss this or any of our podcasts further. We'll meet you there, right on the forums on that website. We've also got new posts, videos, and podcasts coming out every week, so thank you for joining us there and seeing everything that we've got for you.
Take your life in a new direction or in a new way by listening and sharing these podcasts every day. Not only do your ears deserve to be able to hear the greatness that we say, but for you to be able to then emulate in your life one day.
Until next time, thank you for listening.
This has been another life-enhancing, authenticated podcast aired by the OIC and brought to you by the faithful OIC sponsors and contributors. Please tune in every week and subscribe to our podcast. And while you're there, explore our website with all the posts, videos, and podcasts that we have created with you in mind. While you're on the journey through our website, you will see our Patreon page where you can become a faithful contributor yourself with the freedom to be a part of our team today. Thank you.